right, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Every Day is Saturday. I'm your host, Brad Gatto. My normal co-host, Matt Stahl, is not with us today because I got a couple of other guests, and too many cooks in the kitchen is never good. But as all of you listeners know that listen to our podcast on a regular basis, we have these special episodes where we bring guests in to kind of tell their story and define people that we think kind of carry the torch for this Every Day is Saturday lifestyle, not just with what they do day to day, but their attitude towards life. I actually had dinner recently with the guest that we have with us today. And during that dinner, there was just a few things that were said that I was like, you know what, you guys are living the lifestyle that we hope every family we work with lives as far as your attitude is concerned. And I would love for our listeners to know your story. And they were nice enough to oblige. And so they're here with us today. So Steve and Renee Shanesy are our guests today. Steve and Renee, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Good to be here.
Awesome. I don't want to tell your story for the listeners. I want you to tell the story. So, I mean, we don't need to begin with birth, obviously, but you guys met at some point in your life. Why don't we, because that's kind of what we talked about at dinner. Why don't we pick the story up and kind of how you guys met and then tell us kind of how we got to today. Tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Well, we met in Madison, Wisconsin in about 2000. And we were both working for the Rayovac Battery and Flashlight Company. And we eventually started seeing each other, which then Renee left the company because it was a little bit too close for comfort. But our relationship continued strong after that. And after, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, we eventually got married.
Yeah, 4.
Oh, 4. It only seemed like 6 or 7.
Oh my goodness.
That's great. So you're married 2004 then?
We met in 2000 and then we started dating in 2003 and then we were married in 2007.
Right.
2007. Very good. But you live in the Twin Cities area now. So what was the path to get you from Madison to here?
At the time, we're empty nesters, and Renee had gone to college in Colorado, so we thought we'd try living in Colorado. We went out and lived as ski bums in Telluride for 6 months, which was a wonderful experience. We did that because we didn't know exactly where to live, but Telluride was our favorite ski place, so we thought, well, we'll rent there for 6 months, and that was a wonderful experience. We ended up in Colorado Springs, and that's when some long-term health issues that I had been going through kind of kicked back in, and we decided we were pretty alone out in Colorado. Didn't have a network of family and friends, and I'm originally from the Minneapolis area, Minnetonka to be specific, and we thought, you know, these health issues that I do have, we need a network. And my daughter's also here, so we ended up deciding to move back, and we're back in Minnetonka.
And so what year was it that you guys came back?
2000.
No, to Minnetonka. It was 2019 because it was right before COVID.
Yeah. Steve really likes the year 2000. He keeps.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave all the year answers to her. Obviously, I don't know.
That's just the answer to everything. Well, it was in 2000. So back now, and I am going to back up just a little bit because one of the other parts of your story that was pre you guys meeting and eventually marrying was kind of some of the stories of growing up. And so, Steve, you said you grew up in Minnetonka, right?
Go Vikings.
Go Vikings. Yeah. Well, heck of a year we're having.
Unbelievable.
Sunday
Go Pats, even though we're having a bad year.
Okay. You know what, though? You won on Sunday. Surprisingly, you won on Sunday. And so as a Vikings fan, you just won't go away. You know, that 4.5 game lead in the division was going to be 5.5 and basically insurmountable. But no, found a way to pull it out against the Cowboys at the end there. But I'm glad I have a good heart to make it through that Vikings game on Sunday because that was something. So go Vikings. But prior to that, growing up, Steve and Renee, I'll ask you the same question after this so you can kind of be thinking about your answer. So how did you end up in Madison, Steve? I mean, just kind of what'd you do for a living to end up there?
Well, as I said, I am from Minnetonka, and then I went undergrad to the University of Minnesota. I got a bachelor's degree in business there. And I went on to the University of Michigan. I got an MBA, went then into corporate marketing, brand management, started out at Procter & Gamble, then Kraft Foods, a number of years Kraft Foods, up to and including I was vice president of marketing for the Oscar Mayer Corporation. And that was then a step over to the Rayovac battery and flashlight company, which was also in Madison. So I went over there as senior vice president of marketing and eventually became president of Rayovac Remington North America.
That's quite the journey. One of the stops there is the VP of Oscar Mayer. Are you responsible for the hot dog that drives around?
The Wienermobile. No, I did drive to a Super Bowl in Phoenix inside of it and got to everybody. So.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that. That wasn't like a leading question. I didn't know that I was going to get something so interesting out of that. That's great. And Renee, you grew up in Colorado?
No, I grew up in Madison.
Madison.
And then I went in Madison, Wisconsin, and then I went to school in Boulder, University of Colorado. That's right. And then I lived in Denver. I was in marketing. I had a BS in business administration marketing. And then I also lived in Rapid City, South Dakota, and was in marketing there and brand management. And then I came back to Madison, UW-Madison, and got my MBA and worked for US Bank as a product manager, and then the Rayovac Corporation in brand management there, and managed one of the categories there. And that's where I met Steve. Then from there, I had a quick stint when I left Rayovac because of our dating experience. And I had a quick stint as business development director at a private company in Madison. And then I actually followed my passion and my bliss and built, owned, and operated what you'd call a luxury pet resort. So it was dog daycare, dog boarding, retail, grooming, and training.
That's crazy because that's a bit of a left turn.
Well, and one interesting thing, it sounds pretty routine right now, but when she decided to start that and she told me it was going to be dog boarding and dog daycare, I was like, whoa, dog daycare. I'd never even heard of it. So Renee was actually a real pioneer in that area and did truly start one of the real first premium upscale facilities like that.
That is interesting when you say that, because it's true. Now you see them quite a few places.
Yeah, they're quite prolific. And it was a really neat time to be, a pioneer in the industry because you did get a lot of press. And so we were, CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. It was, and back then podcasts were way in their infancy. I don't even know if they were like radio broadcasts, and you were on, the radio broadcasts, and then when they turned into podcasts, and so it was a great time to be an innovator in the industry. And that actually evolved into, I would have a number of requests to franchise the operation. And I actually did not believe, it would have been great for me as the franchisor, but I did not believe it was in the best interest of the franchisee. So eventually started consulting. And to this day, Steve and I both consult for high-end startup pet resorts, mostly in the United States.
So if anybody wants to start up, bestishowconsulting.com.
I think they call that a shameful plug, not a shameless. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, well, anytime you can get back to the source, right, and get back to one of the pioneers in the industry, that's in any field, you would want to be able to do that. And so in such a young field, to still have access to one of the first to do it, I think anybody would love to connect with you. Sounds like you guys should write a book is really what it sounds like to me. So hopefully you're taking notes at home and writing some of the stuff down on your own. Renee, one of the other things that came out at dinner that I'm going to call you out on for the podcast, because I just think it's super interesting, is you had quite the hobby when you were younger. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I am assuming you're referring to jumping out of an airplane.
Well, yeah, that's not normal for most people. So yes, that's.
Yes, I was definitely an adrenaline junkie, and that was part of it, was just the joy of skydiving. And I actually was on a nationally competitive skydiving team. I started when I was in college. And so we competed all over the United States. And we had excellent coaches. Our coaches were world champions, and we would train in Colorado, Arizona, Florida, even Oklahoma in the wind tunnel there. And so I don't even know how many jumps I have, probably 700, 800, and a lot of competitions. And we actually beat the Air Force Academy at nationals one year in Arizona. So that was a real feather in our cap, if you will. And I got
Did they recruit you then? Did the Air Force recruit you after that?
There you go, right? And I got to jump with the Golden Knights, the Army team. So it was a really incredible experience. And really, people hear skydiving and they think, just kind of the fear factor. But when you're on a team and your team is relying on you, it's really more of a mental game than the actual adrenaline side. Of course, you have that too. But it was a lot of training every weekend, sometimes nights. We would go up to Skydive, Colorado, and that was my life for several years.
Yeah, that's crazy. Your guys' story already to this point is nuts. Like the fact that Steve, all the experience you've had in marketing with these larger companies, writing in the Oscar Mayer Arena Mobile down to a Super Bowl. That's that many people could say that. The fact that you just picked up and moved to Colorado, and then the career change to start kind of a pioneering effort in the doggy daycare space to the skydiving and everything in between. It's been really fun these last 3 years or so getting to know you guys. And so, but that's not the entire part of the story. And one of the other reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is because of this attitude that I was speaking about before towards life. And Steve, in passing, you mentioned some health issues that you've had. And so I want to transition to that. But before we do, I just want the listeners to know that really what struck me was, and Steve, I don't know if I'm paraphrasing here, if I'm quoting verbatim, but after kind of filling myself and my colleague Daniel in at dinner about kind of your current health situation, we'll say for now, you had a super positive attitude. And you said 99% of the world would still trade places with me. And it really stuck with me. And so with that being said, why don't you kind of fill the listeners in on kind of your health journey over the last, how many years has it been?
19 now.
19 years. So let's start kind of at the beginning and get us up to speed for the last 19 years.
Yeah, well, back in 2003, now this time I think I got this right.
Got this.
I got to check with Renee to make sure. I could feel a lump in my upper thigh. And as we all know, you feel a lump that won't go away. You start to say, better check it out. And I went and checked it out. And ultimately, it turned out it was a swollen lymph node. And as they dug a little further into that, they determined that I had chronic lymphocytic leukemia, so a form of leukemia. And, I got that call where it was like, okay, you got the C thing. And you sit there, your jaw drops open, and it's like, I got cancer. And, I didn't know exactly where that was going to go. I went in then to the University of Wisconsin, because at the time we were living in Madison, and was hooked up with an oncologist, hematologist. And they said basically it would be a watch and wait thing. That chronic lymphocytic leukemia is generally something older people get. And at the time I was, I think, 47. So I was young to get that. And they knew I had it. And what they wanted to do was track my blood counts. So every couple of months I'd go in and they'd do a blood draw and they'd check it out. And they were able to say, yeah, you're okay. Just keep monitoring it. Well, that went on for about 3 years. At the end of that 3 years, it had accelerated to a point where they said, we've got to push it back. So it was a treatment of chemo. It was not to cure it, but it was to push it back again. So it was successful. It wasn't fun to go through, but it wasn't horrible to go through. And one of the things I learned from that is, I'd have one bad week because they'd give me the chemo and I'd feel sick for a week. And then after that very first time, I was determined that, hey, I'm going to exercise. I got to feel like myself again. So I went down and in the basement, I had a universal gym. And I thought, I don't care if I lift 5 pounds a few times. And I was able to almost do my full routine. And it was such a mental burst of, hey, I'm still me, I'm still strong. And so I kept that up. I started my running again and I stayed fit through the entire thing. And that chemo then pushed it back. I made it another 3 years. And again, the cancer came back. I did the chemo again now for the second time. And pretty much the same story. That lasted me another 2.5 years. And again, it came back. And they did the chemo again. But then that time it came back after 6 months. So they said, we can no longer just try to push it back. We're actually going to have to really treat it. And in treating it now, rather than buying you time, and buying the time was also number one to get the years, but it was also, there's been so many advances in the medical technology. They said, hey, if you can go another 6 years, the technology is going to be so much better that you have odds for a better treatment and a potential cure. So now at this point, they did try to do something for a cure, and that was a stem cell transplant. So they found a match, a genetic match, some woman in Boston, 27 years old, who God knows why was a genetic match for me. And
Steve,
that was
real quick, where are we at? So we started in 2003. At this point, now that you've got a match, what year, how far into the story are we
about
now?
2010, because it was 2006, 2009. It was like 2010, 2011. And I did that. Now, the stem cell transplant was much more difficult and challenging to go through. It was like boy in the bubble. You're in a special air-controlled room at the hospital in the university with, basically they destroy your immune system. And then in giving you the stem cell transplant, they're trying to start you all over with a new healthy one. And so that was in September of that year. And then October, November, December, I was recuperating. It was a long recuperation process. And then I didn't feel so good again. And something didn't seem right. And I told that to the doctor, and he had me come in and do a PET scan. And I didn't even get out into the parking lot after that he didn't call me and say, hey, something has happened. You and Renee have to come back in tomorrow. We've got some bad news. And I said, well, we'll come back in tomorrow, but what was the bad news? And he said, you've gone through something called a Richter's transformation. And I'll tell you more about it tomorrow. But what do? You go home and you get right on Google and you go, Richter's transformation. What's that?
Yeah.
And I looked at it and I thought, this is a death sentence, because I looked at the survival charts and it was basically virtually no one lasts more than 6 months after one of these things. And so I printed this stuff out, and Renee and I went in the next day and I talked to the doctor and I said, hey, I'm not a quitter and I've been tough through all this stuff. But if this is, I showed him these charts. I said, if this is what's going on, I'm not going through any of that stuff again. I'm just going to do what I can for 6 months. And he said, well, I'm not saying that this isn't bad. It's bad. It's very bad. But you never know. I mean, we've got more stem cells frozen from the original donor. We can give you that stem cell chemo again and try it. At least there's a chance. So Renee and I looked at each other and, what do you say? There's a chance. So, okay, let's do it again. So once again, I was in the hospital, boy in the bubble. They went through that severe chemo that take out my entire immune system, gave me the new stem cells. And 7 months after that, I was out bow hunting for elk in Oregon with a 70-pound pack on my back. Wow. So somehow it was a miraculous, put me in a remission, and I felt great and as strong as I ever had. And, thank God I was still alive and doing the things I love.
What did your doctor say at that? I mean, was he shocked? Was he,
he said, you're welcome, because I said, thank you. He is a wonderful doctor. Ironically, I'm still with the same doctor now here up at the University of Minnesota. His name's Dr. Mark Juckett, a wonderful man and a wonderful doctor. He just said, hey, you just never know. And Yeah. So
by this
that,
point too, so now we're 2011-ish, now
yeah,
moving to 2012 maybe. By definition, you've ebbed and flowed and had cancer and treated it how many times by this point now?
that was at the second stem cell transplant would have been my fifth time being treated for cancer. But, again, through all that, I stayed strong. I stayed exercising and, I felt good. And so except for the really bad times with the chemo, which wasn't horrible, but it was challenging, I had good quality of life. And so I just always focused on the good things that, hey, life is good. And I'm enjoying more time with my wife and my kids and my family and my friends and doing the things I love. And so it was like, hey, every day above ground is a good day, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and just to interject too, and then he can continue on because that's only half the story. Steve also will say, he's never felt sorry for himself a day in his life.
Yeah.
Even through all this treatment. And so, so much of it they say is your mental capacity to look at, the glass half full versus the glass half empty. And Steve always had that bright outlook. And even on the days when he felt terrible, he would look at whatever was, promising about that day and promising about tomorrow and focus on that. And it was, it's been inspirational to many, many people.
Well, and I just always felt like, I'm a patriot. I love this country. I was fortunate to be born in this country. I was fortunate to have a very loving family raising me. And, I got a good education and had a good career and was able to do a lot of things. And it was like, that's where I get the thing I said to you, which is, hey, 95% of the world would switch places with me, because at that point, I'm now like 55, 56. And, it was like, hey, my life's good and my children are growing up and they can, pretty much take care of themselves now. And so it was like, hey, what's to feel sorry for? So anyway, as Renee said, there is more to the story.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah. As they say with cancer, a couple-year remission is not a cure. They usually want to see 5 years. Well, I've never made 5 years. So I got about 2 years past that, and they found a tumor on my upper spine. Fortunately, at that point, they had come out with, and again, how lucky I am to be born in America, and I had good health care. And they had come out with this pill called ibrutinib. And by just taking that pill, which I hardly even knew I was doing in terms of any side effects, it shrunk that tumor away and sent it away. So that was number 6 now in terms of my treatments. And that lasted, another couple of years until, And at that point, we felt good enough about life that it was like, hey, this seems behind us. And that's when we made the move to Colorado. And we got out to Colorado, and about 9 months into that, they found another tumor on my lower spine. And this one was not so easily taken care of because I ended up in the emergency room, and a gentleman who I'd never met before came in, told me he was the neurosurgeon.
Oh, you had radiation.
Well, yeah, I did radiation and that didn't work. Oh, and this is over a course of 3 days. And then the next day, my legs could hardly move. And so this guy came in, said he was the neurosurgeon. And if he didn't get that spine off my back that day, I'd probably never walk again. That was obviously not a good day. But Renee and I talked about it with the doctors and some family and friends, and everybody was of the same opinion. Like, hey, what do you do? It sounds like you got to do it. So they wheeled me in for emergency surgery, took the tumor off my spine, and that was a brutal recovery where I left the hospital in a wheelchair, and that was in late September of that year. And as we left, I could get up and walk on a walker, but I was pretty beat up. And hunting, as I said, has always been one of my passions. And I told the doctor as I left, I said, hey, unless you tell me I can't, I got a mule deer hunt in Montana in early November. So that was 6 weeks away. And I said, I'm going on that thing. And he looked at Renee kind of like, don't tell him, but this isn't going to happen. And I went on that trip and I got a deer.
Were you, I mean, without a walker, without assistance, or did you still need?
I worked hard on my physical therapy and I worked hard on, getting myself strong again. And I wasn't 100%. And it wasn't without some help. I was fortunate to have a nephew who went and kind of helped me with some of the, getting up and around in certain places. But God damn it, I was out there and I did it. And, so from that point on, it was again, a slow recovery, but just getting back to the point where I felt pretty normal again. But as we had started some of the story with, at that point, we had said, hey, we can't deal with all this kind of stuff alone.
Actually, I'll just interject here. So
I forgot a chapter. No, go ahead.
So the removal of the tumor from the spine, it was more just to relieve the pressure so that he wouldn't have additional nerve damage. But it was not to remove the tumor completely where he'd be cancer free. So he still had the cancer. So that's when there was a brand new, just approved by the FDA procedure called CAR T cell therapy. He was a candidate. He was the 9th patient at University of Colorado in Denver. And that's where they take your white blood cells, essentially, and they send them off to be genetically modified in a lab. And then they send those back and they genetically modify them to be cancer killers. And they just are searching out and killing the cancer cells, which was just revolutionary and not injuring other cells. So anyways, he went through the whole CAR T cell therapy. And that was, a couple month long procedure in the hospital for 5 weeks, had some complications, but came out of that and really well and did have a 2-year remission. In fact, we thought that he was cured at that point. But having said that, we also thought, well, we thought this before with the stem cell and transplant, and that was not the case. So at that point, we made the decision to move to Minnetonka, to move back to the Twin Cities, to be near Steve's family, our daughter. We just had our first grandchild at that point.
And are expecting another one in 2 days.
Yes, we have another one in 2 days. So we're here, and a lot of support in that respect. And then, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, how could I have forgotten? I forgot a whole.
So how many times have you been treated for cancer now? Now you're moving back to Minnesota. At this point, how many?
At that point, that would have been 11, and now I'm on 13 because obviously that shows jumping ahead a little bit. About 1 year ago, I came down with what I thought was a cold or a flu. And as it turned out, after a couple, 3 weeks of it not going away, I called the oncologist and said, I think we need a PET scan or something. Something's going on again. And yeah, it had come back as lymphoma in my chest, and lymphoma and leukemia are very related. And they did a bone marrow biopsy, and I also had leukemia in my blood. So it had come back pretty strong. They gave me some chemo pills that did give me a reprise, and they knew that's probably all it would be. And then in May of 2022, I went through a trial, which was another cutting edge, state of the art trial. And long and short of it, it did not work.
So, and just for your audience, that's actually called a CAR NK. NK stands for natural killer. And that is the latest technology that they are evaluating for cancer treatment. So he was in a phase 1 clinical trial. It's in very early stages of development.
It's a very promising therapy that's getting a lot of attention and looks very encouraging, but for whatever reason, it just did not work for me. And so we decided that, still trying to say, can we do something? Can we cure it? We now get to the last thing I did, which was a repeat of the T cell procedure. So once again, they drew my blood, genetically modified it, gave it back to me. And we were saddened to hear, and this would have been just like 2 months ago, that also did not work. So at the current time, I've got the lymphoma in my chest and the chemo in my blood and
The leukemia.
yeah, I'm sorry.
Probably chemo too.
Chemo too. And at this point, and we have a appointment with a doctor in a couple of weeks, but we're at the point where we don't think we're trying to cure it anymore. We're just trying to give me quality of life for whatever period of time I may have left. And so I'm getting this weekly infusion of a targeted immunotherapy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's actually an antibody drug. So he has an antibody drug that's being infused weekly, and then an oral drug that's actually
A chemo.
It's actually an immunomodulatory agent, which means that it's an immune system stimulator. So he's taking an immune system stimulator and an antibody. And the stimulator, they're actually, it's interesting, and I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but it's interesting because they can see the T cells, those genetically modified cells. They can see they're still in his system, but they're not doing anything. They haven't activated against the cancer. So long shot, but they're hoping, hey, maybe this will just jumpstart those into action. And these two drugs they use to treat refractory lymphoma, where it's just relapsed, it's not responding to therapy. So this is kind of, the little Hail Mary that they have going on.
Well, and not even a really much of a Hail Mary. I mean, the doctor said, we don't expect this to cure you. What we're trying to do right now is give you time and quality of life. And it has helped prior to starting this regime or regimen, whatever they call it. I was really physically tired, like one flight of stairs would knock me out, and sleepy tired. And right now I feel pretty good. I went deer hunting with my brothers last week, and I'm up and around, but in a way, I guess the best way to say, well, so where are we now, is we've kind of settled on however much time we can buy. And in some ways, if you read some of the research on it, it looks like up to a year, but it could be shorter. But that's kind of what I'm faced with right now.
Well, first and foremost, I genuinely appreciate you telling your story. One of the things, having heard most of that in the past, listening to it again, that strikes me more than anything, because a lot of the details in there, I think, are hard to, unless you know cancer language and vernacular like you do as a family. And of course, I don't think anybody really wants to know cancer language as well as you do.
No.
If we're being honest, it's hard to follow. But I think the thing that gets me the most, Steve, as you talk about it, is your tone of voice. It's just not negative. You just have a positive attitude towards this. You're looking back at all these opportunities that you've had, and it's all about how I got lucky here. I feel really good that this happened. How fortunate was I? The timing of when this particular treatment came out and all that kind of stuff. And it just, the overarching theme is a positive theme. And to be faced with cancer at such a young age, at age 47, now be 19 years and 13 treatments in, and still have that attitude is just, it's super refreshing. Right.
Well,
I just feel like in 2022, we're so lucky to have everything that we have, yet people seem more unhappy on the whole. I can't say than they've ever been, because obviously I've not been alive since people have been around, but it just seems like there's a lot of reasons that people like to complain. And I just love your perspective. And I think that it's refreshing, and I'm glad that my listeners got to hear it. So can you point to you and Renee and in your time together and fighting this battle together, anything in particular of why you feel that way? What's helped keep your spirits and your attitudes the way that they've been?
Well, I mean, once again, I do feel lucky. I mean, if I go back to 2003 when I was diagnosed and somebody said, hey, you've got a form of leukemia, would you take 19 years or what's behind door number 2? I'd say, I'll take the 19 years.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's been 19 years of, I've done so many wonderful things, seen my daughter married, and my son and daughter both, or our son and daughter both, grow up to have great careers, be positive, productive. people and to see our first granddaughter. And as I said, in 2 days, hopefully another granddaughter. We know it's a girl. I just feel like I've always been a glasses half full guy that, there's, looking at what you have, which is what the glass is half full, and then looking at what you don't have is the glass is half empty. And I've just always concentrated on, I've got so many wonderful things in my life, both in terms of the people and the quality of life. I've led a comfortable life, and I've got to travel, and I've got to do things, and I've got a lot of people that love me. And it's just, I can't find in that any reason to feel sorry for myself.
Yeah.
Renee?
Yes. Well, I would say, if we're talking about kind of what are the big key takeaways on surviving and thriving this type of challenge, grace is a big one in this. And what I mean by that is it's really easy to come down on yourself or others for that matter. Why am I having a bad day? Or why is this happening? Or why isn't this person doing that? Medical staff or whomever. And really what I've learned is to give myself some grace, because what happens is you can put a lot of pressure on yourself. For me as a caretaker, I'm not doing things right, or I could be doing better. And you have to just kind of give yourself a break in that respect, because you really can go down some dark rabbit holes there. So a lot of grace for yourself, grace for the person who is, fighting the fight, grace for, friends and family, because a lot of times they don't know what to say or do. So just really, trying to see the best in all of it, rather than, okay, here's kind of the dark side, because it's easy to go down that path, quite honestly. A big one for me too is my faith. I am a Christ follower. I love Jesus, and I've seen, glimpses of God and miracles throughout, and that's a whole nother podcast, throughout these 19 years. But that's been just a big factor for me in surviving and thriving. And I think another thing that's really important is just asking questions and being your own advocate, whether it's medical questions, or being an advocate for the person who is the patient. I think that is extremely important. And the whole knowledge is power thing. It's so true, because the more I feel, I am very into the research. I'm very into the terminology. I want to know how everything works. And for me, that helps me cope. And so that I can understand what the options are. I can have input. I can, fight for my husband. So that's another factor that I think has helped me cope, mentally, emotionally. And I have to say, I'm really, really fortunate and really grateful. I do have a great patient, if you will. Steve's the best. You couldn't ask for a better disposition, a better outlook, just, finding joy. That's the other thing, is I literally find joy in the tiniest things. And I'm excited always to share those with Steve. So I'm really lucky and fortunate to have Steve as my patient, and it makes a huge difference in our quality of life and our time together.
Well, and I was remiss in not putting on my answer what an incredible advocate and caretaker that Renee has been. I don't even want to go into all the details of some of the caretaking she's had to do, but, it has allowed me to not worry about anything. That's why, when we get into all these details, I don't even think about it or worry about it, because she knows everything. And it allows me not to have to, when you are feeling sick, try to get into the nuances of the medicine or the options or even the insurance things. Because Renee was so good in doing that. And it was always woe unto the nurse or doctor or insurance agent who wasn't prepared with the right answer or the right attitude, because then they would hear it from my advocate.
There's a lot in there, you guys, as far as takeaways. A couple of things that I would just like to summarize as we wrap up here is, I think in life in general, one of the things you've embodied really, really well is that your attitude defines your outcomes. It's something that I try to impress upon my boys at home all the time. And I truly believe that the reason that you're standing here today after 19 years of battling and 13 different treatments has a lot to do with your attitude and the way that you've approached your life. If you're going to give up from an attitude perspective, that's probably the outcome that you're going to get. And so I just really appreciate that part of it. And then the other piece to it that I really take away is, the relationship that you guys have, and how you've helped each other through this. I know, Steve, obviously it's personal to you because it's your cancer, but you've also been very cognizant of how that affects your spouse, and you guys have battled this together. And another thing that I just genuinely believe after working with people in a very intimate way in their finances for the last 16 years is that we're built to be in relationship. I think human beings are built for a relationship, and that those positive relationships can define a lot of our outcomes in life as well. And you guys have obviously fought this battle together and done it gracefully. And so I appreciate you guys sharing your story. I don't really want to put you on the spot here, but I'm going to and just ask you, I got to assume, because cancer is so rampant in our country, that somebody's going to listen to this and, have a story that, well, I know this person's battling cancer, battled cancer. We all know people, right? And somebody's probably actively in it or they're new to it. From that perspective, if people reach out, are you willing to kind of share some of your stories or research with others kind of facing similar battles or, health events like you faced in the past?
Yeah. In fact, I signed up to do that and have done that with some people through the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So awesome. If my experience could be of any help to anybody, I'd be happy to talk to them.
Awesome. Well, again, I appreciate you guys. I know it's sometimes it can be hard to talk about. And so I appreciate the grace that you've given me by agreeing to be on the podcast. And I know that your story is going to impact people. So thanks for sharing. Thanks for being with us today. And for all the listeners, thanks for joining us for another episode of Every Day is Saturday. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed getting to talk to Steve and Renee. Again, one more time, shout out to Steve and Renee for being here with me today and sharing their story, especially in the middle of, just kind of another health event, if you will, in your 19-year journey. I'll tell you this, Steve, cats have 9 lives. You're on 13 treatments, so you've got them beat. And Tom Brady's considered the GOAT, and he only has 7 Super Bowls, and you've, treated cancer now your 13th time. So as far as I'm concerned, you're an absolute rock star. I think Bill Russell, he just passed away recently. I think he had 11 championships. I think he's got the most of any of the 4 major sports. And so 13 is more than 11. You should be very, very proud of what you've done to this point. Thanks, listeners, for joining us. You can find everything that you need to know about Fiat. If you need to know any information to get a hold of us or want more information on Steve or Renee or want to reach out to them, you can reach out to us. Our website is the best way to do that, fiatwm.com, fiatwm.com. If you have not yet subscribed to the podcast, you can do so by clicking the link below. We'd appreciate it if you do that as well. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see all of you next Saturday.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.